welcome back to another episode of Iron Culture. I am here with and displaying our new name, Iron Culture presented by Mass, with Dr. Mike Zourdos. And Z, I was just seeing you in person, in the flesh, probably since the first time since pre-COVID, if I recall correctly. Is that right?
I think the last time that I saw you, before just a couple days ago, was in London in 2017. And when I saw you this past weekend, I almost turned around and walked out before I even came up to you. I was like, God, I'm not ready for this again. It's been all of this time, and I don't think I can bear it. And but I got myself together. I composed myself, and I came up and I did what you do when you see anybody you don't want to see, and you're like, "Hey, man, it's so great. How have you been?" And I did the thing, and that's that. But now we're back to normal, and it feels much better.
Honestly, I couldn't even tell. And I'm not sure if it was that I couldn't even tell you didn't want to see me, or that I didn't even care. Honestly, they're very close in the mind of a narcissist. But I think the exposure therapy we have on seeing each other online is probably a good thing, that if we're going to see each other once every 8 years, we should be able to overcome that PTSD from the last time we saw one another.
We did. We persevered. We got through. Fortunately, there were also 2 other Mass members there. And if you're good at doing the math like us, that would make all 4 Mass members. And we were able to spend time with them. So I think Drex and Lauren were able to provide a little bit of a buffer between the 2 of us. Also, I've lost a significant amount of Mass, even though I write for Mass, since the last time I saw you. So I wouldn't have stood a chance if Lauren and Trex weren't providing that buffer in case any physical combat arose. But we did actually end up having a fantastic time at the Sports Nutrition Association conference. All 4 of us gave a talk. We got to do a lot of cool things for Mass. And I got to say, I'll admit, it was pretty great to see you, man.
Yeah, no, so we'll move from the obligatory, we're slightly uncomfortable connecting as males from our generation and dry humor style, breaking the 4th wall, 3rd wall, 5th wall, breaking walls. I feel like the Kool-Aid man right here. And I will say, oh yeah, we had a good time. We're in red too. That bit really worked. I felt like I did that on the fly pretty well. But no, it was fantastic. We got a lot of content done. And we were actually saying off air before we started recording that this might have been the best conference that we have ever attended in terms of the quality of the speakers. I'm going to be a little bit of a jerk to the ivory tower, but at academic conferences, it's very hit and miss. You might have some of the best academics in the world, but they're not necessarily great at communicating topics, or because it is such a broad conference under a relatively large umbrella, there are some talks that no matter how good they are, you just can't really connect with. But because we had a relatively targeted focus of sports nutrition, and the people in the audience were all practitioners, so everyone, I think, nailed the right balance of an evidence-based but still practitioner-focused outcome. And not only were everyone either top-tier practitioners or top-tier academics or doing a little bit of both, but they were all amazing presenters. There was not a single dud in the lineup. And I think the vibe was one that I really appreciated as well. And it was great to see you. It was great I've never met Lauren in person before, so that was also pretty cool. So anyway, it was a great time. And what a better way to welcome us back into our normal kind of online world, because typically you get that post-conference blues if it went well, than to talk about every day maxing out. Now, Dr. Z, I want to say it might have been a decade ago when you first published, it wasn't your first time doing it, but you first published a little-known case series that was specifically on daily 1RM back squats. And that was something that was pretty wild even at that time. I would say maybe it's a little less wild these days now that we've been exploring the dark depths of high volume, high frequency, and, high load training and close proximities to failure. And there's a pretty consistent pushback that you get when some of these pretty nutty protocols come out in the research. The people in the practical world are like, what? You can't do that. So back then, though, it was almost just kind of like cognitive dissonance times 10. Like people just couldn't handle the idea of this. And I think in many ways, it almost seems to fly in the face of the rest of the research we were doing at the time on autoregulation, elements of periodization. And it's like, yeah, you can autoregulate, you can periodize, but how about just every day you lift the heaviest weight physically possible, and then no matter what happens, you're going to do that tomorrow, and then the next day, 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 and guess what? You're going to be really strong, and that's what everyone should do in all cases all the time. That last part, probably not accurate, but just the protocol success, even in a small sample size of 3 in that case series, I found very intriguing, and it led to a lot of, I would say, challenging conversations that led to people thinking probably better about training. So today, that is the backdrop. I'm going to pass it over to you because this has been something that you have done probably more than anyone else who isn't on the Bulgarian weightlifting team, or maybe on, part of the old school John Bros team. I know you've done this many times. You conducted the research, and we are also joined by 2 fabulous guests who've been carrying the torch forward. But I will let you, Dr. Zourdos, kind of introduce them and also this concept as we jump into this episode of Iron Culture presented by Mass.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity here because for the first time, I'm going to be the one 324 episodes in to let our guests know that this is a time where they keep patiently waiting and we keep talking amongst ourselves, and we'll get to them eventually. So I appreciate that, Eric. I'm continuing on with the brand of Iron Culture and how we really do things here. So another 20.
Yeah, well, sorry. One other thing I need to say to extend the time period before they actually get to join us. For those who are new to Iron Culture presented by Mass, we are presented by Mass. And if you would like to support the show, make sure you give us a like. Make sure if you really, really want to support us, you leave a 5-star or a thumbs up. And if you really, 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 really want to support us, man, we would appreciate it if you consider checking out massresearchreview.com. A lot of great content there. And if you add one more really to however many reallys I said about wanting to support us, you may want to become a subscriber, because we actually did review this recent study, and we even have a video on the topic of daily one-arm training by Dr. Zourdos. And importantly, what we do is we make sure that our guests feel so neglected that we create this almost Stockholm-like syndrome that by the time we're done talking and they get to talk, they feel like it's a privilege rather than us have wasted their time. So back to you, Dr. Zourdos. I'll let you take it from here.
Fantastic lead-in, Eric. And so as I take it from here, I want to actually take us back. And I'm going to take us back to a different time. It's going to be 2012, which is, maybe the Facebook era of kind of lifting weights on the internet. And I'm still really in that time. That's my time of social media and correspondence. But in this time, that's when I was competing a lot in powerlifting. And I was a PhD student at the time, and I was getting into conducting my dissertation. And, I competed in the USAPL Florida State Championships. And although I did win my weight class, now this was a different time when someone like me was actually able to put up the numbers he was putting up and be competitive in powerlifting, albeit he was weak. These numbers would put me in probably 15th place in some local competition. But nonetheless, I went only 1 for 3 on squat that day. Matt Gary would have been super disappointed in me. I did not uphold the standard. And I got back from that powerlifting meet, and I had for years been watching these videos, as you mentioned, Eric, of Bros Nose Gym in Las Vegas, of these individuals max squatting every day. And I was fascinated with it, but I really couldn't rectify it with what I was learning about training and what I was studying in these periodization concepts and rest and recovery and so forth. But I was so fixated on this, and I became so frustrated with what was going on. And as a alumni of the Smolov-based mesocycle and intense mesocycle many times, I decided what could be even more difficult than that. So after I only went 1 for 3 on the squat, that night I went to my garage gym and I max squatted again. I texted the only other guy on the team, the powerlifting team at Florida State, that I knew would indulge me. He met me the next day, and we continued to max squat every day. I squatted 441 pounds or 200 kilos at that meet. 49 days later, after max squatting every single day and performing 5 sets of volume, I squatted 495 pounds or 5 plates on the bar. And so I was elated with this progress. Over the years, I continued to utilize this protocol for the next 3-4 years, trained for Raw Nationals later that summer, did that, trained for the Arnold when I competed at the Arnold, and I max squatted every day leading up to that, got a 500-pound plus squat at that competition, and then conducted the case series that you talked about, Eric, which was a 3-person case series in which individuals max squatted 36 out of the 37 day, or 35 out of the 37 days, and we published that in 2016. But after that, I had some back injuries, and now I'm an old man who competes in another discipline that we won't talk about that's not lifting weights. It's not for this show. But it was kind of crickets. It was quiet on the daily 1RM training setting. There had been some other papers, one that was a biceps paper that came in the literature, then some other papers that came out looking at, we see some
I saw
flexing already, and some other papers looking at some modified daily 1RM training. But all kidding aside, I was fascinated with this, and in a very serious note, I found that the protocol worked extraordinarily well. There were some drawbacks. I always had trouble coming off of a cycle, meaning after I'm finished with a 30-day stint, or even the longest stint I did was over 100 days, and I started doing it twice a day. And after I finished that, I had trouble. How do I manage the volume after this? How long do I go back to this? And there's so much that I want to get into with this today is, would we actually recommend this? How miserable do you feel when you're doing it? Is it something you should do all the time? And we'll get into that. So this statement just saying it works isn't saying I would always recommend it. It's just saying that it tended to work. So there was crickets until, Eric, a magical day not too long ago, where I was looking through our journal sweep and I saw a paper that was looking like it was named something related to daily 1RM training, this time in the bench press. I said, it can't be. I clicked on it. I looked. Oh my God, it is. It is. It is. I have to review this. I think I said in our group chat to Mass, I feel like I have to do this one. I read the paper. I immediately fired off an email to one of the individuals here with us today. And I said, for no other reason other than just to say, this is amazing. I am so excited to read the paper. So with that said, we have 2 of the individuals involved in that study here. We have Kaylee Chism, a student at Samford University. And we have the one and only, don't think we don't hear things, Dr. Biceps on the show with us today. Right? He's well known, and
Let's go.
It was just such a pleasure. That's when you've reached the pinnacle. You may see his name on the screen. You may think this is Dr. Washmuth. That is not the case. He has reached the pinnacle. The top. Is there a pyramid for this, Eric? I don't know. I'll leave that to you.
I will answer that question real quick, and I'll say, have you ever met Dr. Grant Tinsley in person?
I have not, but it would be an honor to do so.
And I'll tell you, I don't know whether or not Dr. Washmuth or Dr. Grant Tinsley has the best arms and best biceps in academia, but I know it'd be close after seeing that shot. If you're listening to us on typical podcast feeds and you're not watching on YouTube, you missed out. We're going to probably make him do that a few more times and see if we can ruin his academic career. But let's just say it's impressive. Let's just say it's impressive. And if there is a pyramid, we may need to reserve a spot for 2 at the tippity top. But it's possible if we got the right kind of pose down, we could find out. But I'll leave it there. The important questions for the future.
So we have 2 of those individuals involved in this wonderful study that we're going to talk about, Kaylee Chism and Nick Washmuth, or Dr. Washmuth, Dr. Biceps. Thank you very much to both of you for joining us today. And so
thank you all for having us.
It is wonderful to have you guys here. So you guys are both at Samford University in the physical therapy department. Dr. Washmuth, the professor, and Kaylee, you are a student currently. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm a first-year student.
All right. What an introduction to your first year to be involved in a daily 1RM study. And so I was very excited when I read the study, and I did reach out to Dr. Washmuth, and he was very kind to respond right away, and we chatted about the study a little bit, and then I reviewed it in mass. And so This study is a study for those that kind of need even a little bit more background, that looked over 38 days and had individuals max every single day for the first 34 days. Then did a little bit of a taper on day 35, day 36 and 37 off, and then a max on day 38. And so you tracked over time the change in bench press 1RM to see, would this bench press 1RM increase? When would it peak? What would it be at post-testing? Did it increase linearly? Did it tend to vary? Kind of gauge how people felt each day. But for everybody watching or listening, that is 34 consecutive days of maxing, and then a post-test on day 38. So if you have not heard of this idea or you're not familiar with it, I think this will be very interesting to see if it does work, if we do recommend it, and so forth. And before I turn it to each of you to tell us what happened in the study, we were talking a little bit offline. I would like to hear about how this study came about and kind of the etiology of this study, when you guys as learning about this protocol and Dr. Washmuth getting some students on board for this. So I'd love to hear about the etiology and then go into kind of what you found and what you learned from the study. Yes, Eric.
And also, if I may, I imagine that Dr. Washmuth, you didn't do your PhD specifically in 1RM training, and Kaylee, that's also not the topic of your future studies. I'd love to hear just a bit of a background of yourselves. Like, how did you find yourself doing this, and who are you? What are you about? And kind of, if you can introduce yourselves a bit to the listener as well, I think that would be really helpful to put everything in context.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Mike and Eric, appreciate you having us on here. This is an incredible honor. Again, I'm Nick Washmuth. I am trained as a physical therapist, although I no longer practice. I practiced for about 8 years and transitioned into academia. And I'm currently on faculty at Stanford University in the Department of Physical Therapy. And actually, I'm currently enrolled as a PhD student at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where I study the beneficial effects of swearing. So I'm enrolled as a PhD student. And my research agenda is basically focused on learning more about and challenging some of these categorical understandings that I have been led to believe that are not always true. For example, lifting. I'm trained as a PT. Lifting with your back is supposedly bad. Lifting with legs is good. Dissect the literature. Sometimes lifting with your back is very beneficial. Let's look at the CrossFit community. Let's look at high rep deadlifts for time. If you look at a CrossFit or anyone deadlifting quickly for time, for speed, they tend to transition into a more of a lift with their back stoop posture. It's more efficient. It's less metabolically taxing. So there's certain qualities where lifting with your back may be beneficial. I enjoy studying the it depends type of questions. So these categorical understandings, lifting with your back is bad, swearing is bad. Well, not always. On what does it depend? So we debate, Kaylee's class had a debate of what lifting technique is the best. And it's however you define the best. So a group debated stoop lifting would be the best, or squat lifting, or semi-squat. And one of the arguments that one of the groups made was, if you look at the CrossFit community in a CrossFit competition, someone doing some high rep deadlifts for time, they tend to move in a more of a stoop pattern. It's quicker and it's less metabolically taxing, which has some benefits in that situation. And we can talk about more about swearing here in a second, but what led me to want to do this 1RM protocol is that it challenges my traditional kind of knowledge of what strength and conditioning should entail, how I was educated of classic strength and conditioning concepts. And before I get further, let me let Kaylee introduce herself and talk about her role in this protocol in this study.
I'm Kaylee. I'm a first-year PT student at Stanford University, and I have been lifting for like 2 years, and mainly for strength, but bench was specifically like the one thing I actually enjoyed doing. I don't really care to squat or deadlift. But so Dr. Washmuth sent a Teams message to our whole cohort and was like, I've been doing this for a few years. Do you guys want to do it with me? And then we were like, oh, that sounds cool. And since I'd started school, I guess like 4 or 5 months before, my bench had like significantly dropped, like a lot of weight, like 15 pounds, but that's a lot for like what I was lifting. And so I was like, that sounds fun. And if it works, then maybe I'll get to hit like a lifetime goal. So that's kind of how we all got started, was Dr. Washmuth bringing it to us and introducing us to the fun that it is.
Amazing. 2 very important questions. 1, Kaylee, what was the lifetime goal, and what are you benching these days?
My lifetime goal is 185. I did not hit it. I hit 170, which was close. But now I haven't maxed actually since the study, but I'm working with 135.
Hey,
like,
you got a skillet on there. That's what's up, though. So that's very impressive. That's awesome. Second, extremely important question. Doctor, soon to be double doctor Nick Washmuth, aka Double Doctor Biceps. Which doctorate is going to go first once you complete your PhD in the order? The DPT or the PhD? And there is a right and a wrong answer that may or may not end the podcast.
It'd be the PhD in swearing, obviously.
Let's effing go. I'll leave that off because I don't have a PhD in swearing. I'll probably do it wrong. But anyway, I just wanted to cover those 2 important points, Zourdos, so I'll let you take it from here, though.
Extraordinarily important points. And I do want to get back to your work on swearing and performance after we talk about the daily 1RM study, because I am quite interested in that. And you did have a few papers that were pretty recent on this that I was able to check out before we jumped on here. So with that, it's amazing that I'm thinking back to when I was a student, and if I had a professor reach out to a class and say, hey, you guys want to start bench maxing every day? Like, I was asking these kinds of questions. I went to a small school, did an exercise science major, and it was really an athletic training kind of department. And so I'd be taking notes in ex-phys class. This is, you had to write down then, it was back 2003, 2004, exactly. And I'd be asking questions, and all that was on the internet at the time was like Westside Barbell. And so I'd be looking at Westside Barbell, reading Louis' old articles, and I'd be asking stuff like, well, if I were to front squat 10 sets of 2 with bands, and the person teaching the class, he was a great guy, but I remember he said to me verbatim, he said, why don't we just keep those questions for after class? And like, there was no interest in any of this stuff. So just the fact that we have a professor doing that, and then Kaylee, your response and other students' response saying, yes, like that sounds cool. What a dynamic we have to start off this study. So as you get into, we have a little bit of the origin of the study here. I know I outlined a little bit of the protocol, but I'd love to hear what you found and what you learned from the study as a, going through it, if you're performing it, and as a researcher. Take us through that, not just the findings, but what you learned from it. What did you observe, the fluctuations, and what would you recommend, and how did your mind change on it after going through this protocol?
Yeah, let me back up a little bit and share how it's evolved for me over the past 5 years or so. So I first learned about this protocol, Mike's protocol, in the 2016 paper, I believe. I learned about it in 2019. So I was talking with a colleague of mine, Tyler Williams, excellent individual. And we were talking about management of tendinopathies. He was dealing with some high hamstring tendinopathy, and we talked about a loading regimen where you basically load the tendon pretty aggressively every day. And he's like, Nick, there was a recent case series that came out about max back squatting every day. I was like, really? Share this with me. I read it, and it changed my life. I did the exact protocol for 38 days because I misread the paper, and I thought Mike did it for 38 days, but I understand it was 37 days. I did it for 38 days. And I was so fatigued at the end that I took 2 full days off before the 38th day. But I peaked on day 38 after those 2 days off. So I followed that same 2 days off before a final peak day, if you will, every other time I've done this. So that's how I encourage the the 7 participants in our current bench press study. So that's how it kind of evolved. But I first did the program in 2020, and I saw a 16% increase in my bench press. Next year, I did it for the shoulder press, 19% improvement. Back to bench press, 12% improvement. And barbell curl, bicep curl, magical year that was. 26% increase in bicep strength. And then I decided I need to share this and involve others. So that's when I sent an email out to Kaylee's class and it's like, who wants to do this with me? And I was hoping for 2 or 3 or 4 individuals. 7 students said, heck yeah, let's do it.
Wow. I have 2 comments, Mike. One, Eddie, Dr. Potato, if we can call him, with the theme of the current podcast. This is someone who none of you will know, and that's fine. He would be so vindicated by the fact that Nick took 2 days off completely, maybe had an actual experience of a taper, not just an on paper protocol written down taper, and actually also hit his highest number on the day of testing. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah, my son affectionately calls this gentleman Uncle Potato, and he very strong individual and did the protocol. And when in our study, our quote taper was working up on day 36 to a single at I think 80 or 85% of 1RM, and I was like, hey, this is the taper. He famously looks. He was like, what do you mean taper? It's like you didn't put a taper. There's no taper. And I know you have a second point, Eric, but I'll get back. We had in peer review this month. I wrote the article reviewing your guys' study. And as I was going through your protocol, then I was going through some anecdotes I had over the years and sharing those figures in the Mass Research Review. And I wrote that it was difficult to tell if the taper I used worked because I squatted just about similar to my weekly average on the day that I had a meet. I did this leading into a meet. And Eric in peer review said, Mike, I don't think your taper worked. And I said, it's hard to tell. I said passive aggressively, it's hard to tell, Eric, that it worked because we don't have a comparison group. And he said, okay. But it's very interesting to hear in your study that you did take 2 full days off, and each time that you peaked that well. And I'm looking at the results of the study here, and I'm seeing many of the individuals peaked toward the end of the study, and some of the individuals did peak right at the end. So that's a more minor point of the study, but did you guys feel that 2 days completely off was an effective taper in this study?
It felt weird not benching for 2 days, so I definitely felt more rested on day 38. But I think our day 38 was a competition of sorts because it was our 1RM competition in our cohort. So I don't know if like nerves were higher, but I don't think any of us actually improved day 38. So I don't know if it was effective, but I did definitely feel more rested.
Okay. Dr. Washmuth, in your own anecdotes, did you feel that 2-day taper was effective?
I did, and that's why I kind of encourage the students to use that protocol just based on my experience. But obviously in the paper, they didn't see that same peak at the end. That 2 days rest was not as beneficial for the 7 participants as it was for me.
Yeah, it's such a difficult thing to know when we have these studies, right? And you guys have a case series of 7 and we have a case series of 3. When you don't have a comparison group, you really just can't make a definitive conclusion, how this would be. And if there's, and how folks are fatiguing throughout, and perhaps it would be a longer taper that would be better, or perhaps even a shorter taper. I always really struggled with this because I felt I would keep the principles of the taper in mind, which were to somewhat maintain intensity, decrease volume, and maintain frequency. And so to Kaylee's point, I always felt weird if I had a day off. So doing this many times for many cycles, if I almost never missed a day, but I can think of 2 times throughout the years I did this where I was traveling and it just happened that this had to miss a day, or would have it traveled to a family event, and leaving immediately to squat would have caused some serious family issue that I debated in my head if I should just let that issue happen anyway. But I never felt great when I did miss a day. So it's really hard to know and hard to tell how you should taper in something like this. And so from that, what are the overarching thoughts from the study? Was there anything that after the study you came out of it thinking differently than either of you did before the start from your previous experience working with it?
I think for me, I always kind of felt like prior to working out, if I didn't feel like working out or like felt like it was going to be a weekday or something, that kind of dictated it. But we did the mood scores before we lifted each day, and those were not consistent at all with how we lifted. And so I think that kind of changed. If I could just get to the gym and do it, then it would probably be better than what I was thinking it would be. Also, just the feeling of fatigue also really didn't dictate how well I performed that day, which is very different than what I previously thought.
Yeah,
very true. I would totally agree. Mood scores were all over the place and had no correlation with performance. How fatigued I felt had no correlation. But what did, I think, although we didn't measure this, it's just anecdotally, what after my warm-up sets, I could tell you what was going to happen that session. But I could have felt fatigued going into it, but after those warm-up sets, I could tell you, hey, this is going to be a good day, or hey, I don't have it today. That was pretty consistent throughout the program.
I think that is very much something that I experienced as well. And so you guys did the profile of mood state scale, and we didn't do that, but we did a perceived recovery status scale, and we didn't really notice much relationship either. But to Dr. Washmuth's point, one thing that we did in ours is we looked at velocity on all of the attempts. And so I knew once I hit 85%, I would be able to predict pretty closely what I was going to squat that day. And it, depending on how fast that moved. I think on the first day I moved that at, 0.5 meters per second. And if I moved that one day at like 0.55 or 0.56 meters per second, and that day, like I knew right away. But to your point, and a lot of the anecdotes I went through, and in doing this many times, 30-day cycles, 50-day cycles, 100-day cycles, you're feeling so rough at certain points that when you're warming up, it feels really like a struggle just to get under the bar a lot of the time. But once you make it through that warm-up up to 80, 85%, the tide can turn, right? So there were so many days where I would go into the gym, no desire whatsoever to be there, right? You do anything and everything to elongate the warm-up, to walk around, to talk to somebody else, to do this or that. Then you finally squat the bar, you finally squat 135, 185, 225, whatever it is, and it can be moving really slow. But for me, in pounds, my 85% being, or 80% being somewhere in the low 400s, when I was squatting over 500 for this, I would get a feel right around there how it would go. Even if 375 felt like a 8 RPE, I would know once I got to 405 to 420 to 430 how that felt. So you really have to get through those early warm-ups. And I think in the broader picture, we oftentimes talk about, and Eric, you and I have made a career talking about autoregulation. And there is a lot of merit, of course, to saying, hey, what metric am I going to use to guide my training today? Saying, hey, okay, I'm not feeling good. Am I going to use this scale, or am I going to say if my velocity is depressed, if my vertical jump isn't very good, what metric am I going to use to predict my training? But what's important, and I always harp on with this, is it's important that metric actually predicts performance. And so often we go into the gym and we feel sore, but I would challenge people to think how many times they felt sore and they actually start warming up, and then all of a sudden they feel okay. Right? You go for a walk around the block, you get the blood flowing a little bit, the soreness goes away, and you can perform. Or maybe you didn't feel great before a game or a competition of some sort that you've had, and then you got into the middle of it and you felt fine. And so certainly you can feel so rough where you're not going to perform well that day. But when you do a protocol like this, a lot of it is predicated on still showing up and doing the work, even on the days that you just don't feel like you can move and you can't do well. And that kind of brings me into what iteration of this do we think is the way to go? And what I mean by that is, so we have daily 1RM training, but in your study, I think I noted from my review that at least every participant missed at least one day, some more than others, but everybody didn't perform every day of the protocol. And so with that, I have some questions that I've been dying to talk to people about that have had this experience over the years, which is, do we really think that the 1RM training has to be done every single day? Would doing it just a couple times per week work? And then let's start there. Then there's a volume question. But let's stop there and say, when we say daily 1RM training, does it have to be every day? There is data from the famous Dr. Pack that has looked at doing this just a couple times a week. Do you all think that doing a couple times a week would be sufficient? Or do you think that actually putting in the work every single day is necessary to get this rate of progress? Kaylee, we'll start with you. You going through the protocol and being part of this on your quest for the 185 bench, which you're gonna get, and we're gonna have a triumphant maybe announcement on the show when you get there. So what would you say going through this? If you miss days, did you feel that those hurt you when you missed those days, or do you feel if you were to go back and do it again a couple times a week would get the job done?
Yeah, I actually had the worst adherence rate of all of us. I was the one that missed 7 days. So, but honestly, my shoulder did start hurting really bad. So that is another thing, is like, it is tough to do it every day. But I think I would have had better results if I had gone every day, but also I could have actually hurt myself. So who's to say on that? But, I did have a lower percent of increase when compared to the average of everyone else. So it's hard to say if that's because I missed days or just because I'd been benching heavier than a lot of the other participants that did it more consistently. I do think for if you could do it for 30 to 35 days, that you would get better results just based off of the case series you did and then ours too.
Yeah, a modified version, I think, can also be effective. Is it more effective? I question that. Just anecdotally, how we felt, the idea of going in there every day to frequent heavy lifting, going back and doing it again. If your goal is to get as strong as you can in 38 days, 37 days, would a modified program be effective? Absolutely. More effective? I don't know. That I question that. I would lean towards the daily heavy lifting, 1RM every single day.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. But anytime, it goes back to what we said a few minutes ago. Anytime you're doing a case series or you're doing observational work, you just can't know, and I just don't have empirical data. So I always stop short of my bias is to say every day, right? That's the protocol. That's what we all do, and it's just awesome. To go in and do that every day and to know what that feels like. And I think mentally making it through it, especially depending on the exercise you're using with it, is quite a big deal. I do know one brave soul, a certain Ben Esgro, who has done this on the deadlift. We used to train every day. At the time, it wasn't Skype or Zoom. We used an app called Tango. So we would tango together while I would max squat and he would max deadlift. And he did that for over 30 days with some good success. I might add, doing that. But it's hard to know for sure what protocol is better. But to Dr. Washmuth's point, I would go so far to say that I do think maxing a few times a week can be effective, provide a meaningful increase, whether that's a greater or a smaller increase than it would be every day, I'm not sure. But perhaps for those that are newer to this, that is a good place to start, is to say, hey, I am doing this periodized program. I'm starting to get up into a frequency of 2, maybe even 3 times per week on a main lift. And now I want to really peak my strength or get more used to this type of training in a shorter amount of time. And I think there's some efficacy then to say, all right, I could start with a heavy-ish single, once or twice a week, or even go up to 3 times per week. And that kind of brings us into the next question of dosage, right? So the first question of dosage on this is, how often does it have to be every day? The second question of dosage is to what intensity. What I mean by that, because intensity is broadly defined, is if we think in the construct of RP and RIR, is does it have to be an actual max? Could it be a 9 RP or a 9.5 RP? For me, anecdotally, when I was doing this, and I included some of this in the mass article, I linked my old spreadsheets that I took out of the 2012 archives. And when I say that I was doing this to a max every day, what I mean by that is every day, and justice for all, as high as it could possibly go on the stereo, a new bottle of nose torque, the smelling salts every single day, and just absolute 10 RP on the bar. And I only failed a couple times, but I would go to the absolute max every single day on this. So with that said, and I know, Eric, you have some experience doing a modified version of this as well. I would love to hear from everyone going around the horn. Kaylee, where your max is to that absolute 10 RPE, how many times did you fail? And do you believe, or do you think you would need to actually go to that max every day? Or do you think a modified dosage a little bit away from failure would be sufficient?
Yeah, I went to absolute failure every day. I didn't go without a spot. It was nice as I was getting into the protocol. I knew what I would hit about each day, so I didn't have to ask for a spot until I was getting closer to like my previous max. But there were days that I didn't ever try more than 3 times to hit a new weight. And then there were days where I think I had tried for a long time to get, it was 175. And before that, maybe 165, 170. I failed it 2 or 3 times. And then I would unrack it, do basically a negative, knew I probably wouldn't get it, and still try, but then have someone pull it up. So I think the days that I did that, I went up the next day. So I think going to absolute failure is beneficial.
Yeah, I'll be the skeptic on the podcast because I actually think the data that we do have that isn't observational directly contradicts the idea that there's just an increasing dose response of having a higher and higher and higher and higher and higher proportion of your loading at a larger percentage of 1RM. If we look at the data, I'll use one actual specific original research paper that is, I think, probably maybe more specific to this, because if we extrapolate from, say, the meta-regressions that have come out of your lab, Dr. Z, then there's some extrapolations that have just not included singles at all. We're looking at an average load of like 9 reps, right? But when we look at some studies that were done on junior weightlifters, so we're talking late teens, early 20s by Gonzalez Badillo back in the day, and they were pretty well trained as well. And if anything, I see young, vibrant lifters as being potentially more responsive to this, not less. They had 2 different papers that came out, basically a low, moderate, and high volume load protocol compared to what they were historically doing in this group of weightlifters, or during this other phase of training, a low, moderate, and high proportion of the lifts being done at over 90% of 1RM on the snatch, clean and jerk, and back squat. And the interesting thing is that there weren't really clear advantages of having a higher and higher escalating proportion when you looked at the dose response of the volume being performed at a percentage of 1RM that was over 90%. And I think another bit of data we have on this, and it's not super clear, but is from Dr. Pack's work, where when you look at the total number of sets, not just the singles, the amount of an increase that you got from just doing, a 2-3-1 protocol. So that's 2 squat singles at a near max, 3 bench singles at a near max, 1 deadlift single at a near max, and then going to also doing back offsets on those days. It improved all the lifts pretty well, but the deadlift disproportionately so, because it went from just 1 single set to 3 sets per week. And then it kind of started to plateau as far as there wasn't a relative clear dose response of number of sets that were heavy being performed. So my perspective on this general relationship is that specificity is very powerful, but that also means that you kind of can saturate that signal at a relatively modest dose. I'd also point out that daily is arbitrary. it's been done. That's what they do in the Bulgarian system. That's what Zourdos did. And once it's published, some of the more academically minded individuals go, well, that's the protocol. That's the one you do. It's been proven. But it almost kind of has this slight bias of, well, only things that have been measured, managed, and published exist. Other things don't. And I can tell you that in my coaching experience as a powerlifting coach and my personal experience, which I haven't done the full protocol, so I'm not going to lean on as much, there does seem to be a point where you can max more frequently, or you could make all of those singles at a 10 instead of a 9, or have some as 8s evens, where it's unclear to me that you're getting a benefit from it. But it is clear that it's harder and it's more fatiguing. And another thing I notice in the long term is that the harder those phases are, where someone pushes really, really hard, the more they peak, but the more there's a valley afterwards. And something that I would always find interesting when I talk to Dr. Z about his experiences of how did this go? Like, well, so where's your max at now? He's like, well, I'm not at that same peak. And I'm like, okay. But I think that's to some degree true of any strength athlete's experience, is that if you look at the course of a year, they're going to have peaks at different times, but they seem more extreme to me when people take these really hardcore daily 1RM type protocols. And I would personally prefer, as from a coaching perspective, a performance perspective, to keep a more modest dose in at all times and have a better perspective on where it is, and not to see these drastic swings. So Kaylee, you mentioned you're hitting about a plate right now for some reps, but you were up to, 170. So there's like a 30-pound swing there in potential maxing. So now it's not like you were like, hey, and my goal right now is to be the best powerlifter I possibly can be. You're like, hey, I love bench, so let's go. And there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I know if I have a concentrated block of time dedicated to a lift, I can peak it, and we can use that as a tool. But from my perspective, I do think when you're using something highly specific that you can kind of saturate that signal pretty early. And then logistically, from a powerlifting or weightlifting or strongman or any type of other perspective, when you're not just focused on a lift, when you're trying to improve a collection of lifts in the case of a strongman, or 3 or 2 for your barbell athletes, you do really have to think about what's the kind of that peak of efficiency in terms of what do you get out of it without, really pushing that athlete into the hole psychologically or physically, because it sort of doesn't really matter in practice. So anyway, that's my perspective. And the example of what I saw when I started to see less benefits and where did I start to have more downsides was that I had to personally build up from doing roughly that same 2-3-1 protocol up to the highest frequency, which I had for about one block of training prior to tapering, where I had my best meet. I was squatting 5 times a week, deadlifting 4 times a week, and benching 6 times a week to a single somewhere between a 7 to a 10 RPE. And I was kind of undulating those. So if I had a light single the next day, and I would notice it, almost like when you do a lot of volume, you're going to perform pretty poorly the next day. I noticed that when I was hitting 9 and 10 RPE singles, or 9.5 RPE singles, the next day probably wasn't going to be quite as good. But if I had, then did a 7 RPE between that and I came back, I would pretty reliably be ready to hit something close to peak or a new peak. So I have done, I would say, 8 to 10 RPE singles on each of the lifts, at least 4 times, with the lowest frequency being deadlift, but to a max of 6 times on bench and 5 on squat. And I did them all simultaneously with volume afterwards. It was a brutal protocol, but that was very effective. And one thing I did notice, though, is compared to what I hear from some other people, the decrement in strength with when I would then go to a kind of more of a maintenance dose, there was much less of a contrast between the two.
So all I heard is somebody that just doesn't want to work that hard, taking it easy, that's really, I don't know about you guys. Eric, on that, when you were doing that, what was the length of time that you did that for?
Yeah, so this was all part of a 16-week build-up into a meet. So I started with much more volume focus and that 2-3-1 protocol with a lot of bodybuilding work afterwards, but more specific to, I would say, a hypertrophy-oriented program for powerlifting. And I did this in like four 4-week blocks. So it was like 4, 4, 4. Each time I increase the frequency and increase the RPE on the singles. So it went from 231 to 342 to 453 to 564, and then taper into the meet. And then the proportion of time spent doing accessories versus back off work was changing as well. So I started with really just doing the singles and maybe some back off work on bench, and then a lot of non-specific training. And then that proportion decreased, and then I started doing the back off volume on some days. So by the time I was in that last phase, I was doing like 2x3 after each one of those singles at 80% of the single for the day.
So I wonder, and I don't necessarily agree or disagree, because I honestly just don't know.
Sure.
But I wonder to go this is going the complete other way from what you suggested, which very well may be true, is that you notice you did better when you would take like a 7 RP day, the next day you maybe go up to 10 and back down and so forth, which on the surface makes sense because you're a little bit more recovered by staying a few reps shy of failure. However, since you were doing the 10 RPs infrequently, perhaps you just weren't adapting to them as somebody that would do it every day. And the increased dosage, while you would for anyone who is fortunate enough to watch this episode on YouTube, the great Dr. Trexler isn't here to chastise me for using my hands to demonstrate figures, which I'm going to do anyways for those that are listening and can't see this. But what I'm getting at is when you start a protocol like this, typically, and I was actually a little bit surprised, Kaylee and Dr. Biceps, that we didn't see this in your project as much as we did in mine. But typically, every time I've started a protocol like this, I've always seen a drop off right away, right? A valley immediately. And it takes me about a week to get back. So I think that the time I started, one time I started with about a 220 kilo squat, and I dropped down maybe to about 205 or 210 the next few days a week. And then about a week, I got back to baseline and then peaked up about 230, 235 after that, 500, 507, 512, whatever those numbers are. And kind of went up from there. And then it would be peaks and valleys. But I felt that performing the max every day is what made me adjust to it enough and adapt to it enough where I was able to keep doing it. Whereas if I wouldn't have done it so frequently, perhaps a single max would have beat me up considerably, and I would have had a valley every time after I hit a peak or a PR or something like that. I'm not saying that's definitely the case. Again, this is all observational data. So Dr. Helms may absolutely be correct on that. But it's just interesting to note in the dosage. Nick, I'd like to get your take on that. And then the third component of this is volume, after I know Dr. Helms was chime in here.
Yeah, the one fair-ish comparison I have is actually bench press, because all the way back in 2018, before I did this kind of integrated approach, I was doing basically a powerlifting protocol that was a little more traditional for squat and deadlift, so not hitting that kind of frequency, and I specialized on bench. And what I did was 5 to 6 days a week. I did volume bench for a block, and then I had a block for 4 weeks where I maxed out every day, every training day. So it was 5 to 6 days a week, and the only difference was my schedule. There are some weeks I couldn't train 6 times. So the number I hit on paper was higher. I peaked at a 165 touch and go when I was doing daily maxes, but I was also 6 kilograms heavier. And when I did the protocol that I described, I did a paused bench to competition standard at 155. So I think arguably maybe the latter is slightly better bench press when you're 10, 11 pounds lighter. But it was also another 2 or 3 years of training under my belt. So it's a hard comparison.
It's also hard to compare and to know. Nick, where do you land on this in terms of, kind of the dosage that's needed in going to a 10 RP, if you will, every day? And then I'd like after that to get into the volume component, which is talk about the volume you guys did in the study, and then how much back off volume do we think is actually necessary for these gains?
Yeah, first of all, I sense a genesis of a collaborative study here of answering these questions out of let's combine labs and make it happen. And a genuine desire that I have here to let's help answer these questions. Let's create some new knowledge around best practice with this original 2016 protocol by Mike.
Let's do it.
But as far as going to complete 1RM, I would say that was the most challenging part of the protocol. I didn't have an issue going in daily. If you're conditioned in your routine of working out daily, that was not the challenge. It was that the mental, you have to be in a different mindset to go in there and give it your all. You could do a heavy single that was just shy of a 1RM and be fine. It wouldn't be as mentally taxing. That's what fatigued me, was just that going in there and actually doing a true 1RM. It was long. I was waiting 5+ minutes between sets. The warm-ups lasted forever. It was just mentally exhausting. So I do think maybe not going to that true 1RM each time may have some advantages. What that threshold is, I don't know. There's likely a threshold you have to reach to get those benefits. I couldn't tell you what it is, but I to decrease that mental burden and load and just overall fatigue physically and mentally, I think going just shy of a 1RM may have some benefits.
Yeah. And then in terms of the volume, in our case series, and this is really what I just did in practice, and exactly why I did this, I can't pinpoint, probably from some of the Bros Knows videos that I was watching or things that I was just learning, because that's all that there was at the time, and reading about the old Bulgarian weightlifting team. I did 5 sets of 3 at 85% of whatever I would max that day. And then the next day I would do 5 sets of 2 at 90% of whatever I would max that day. And I rotated that volume. We did that in our case series. In your study, you guys did both those protocols, but you gave the participants a choice and they could choose between which one of those they wanted to do. In my opinion, it probably doesn't matter much which one they would choose to do. But Kaylee, how do you feel the volume helped you? Do you feel that performing the volume was beneficial? Do you feel that if you only did the 1RM and no volume, you still would have gained similar progress? Or if you were to do a modified version, let's say 2 or 3 sets of the volume, would that have been sufficient?
Yeah, I think talking to some of the other girls that did the study, we felt that we were getting stronger doing the volume sets, because I think that was a gauge for us of like, okay, I didn't get my volume sets today, but then the next day going in, hitting the same max, and then hitting the volume sets, whether that be just encouraging, so then you can do better the next day because you feel stronger in a sense. So we definitely like anecdotally thought that it made us stronger. I also definitely preferred the 5 sets of 2 at 90%. It was way easier for me to hit those than to hit 5 sets of 3 at 85%. Something about the 4th and 5th set, getting the 3rd rep on those 2 sets was always really hard. I definitely think there could be benefit from backing off that a little bit, because 5 sets can be a lot, in my opinion.
3 reps is a lot of cardio. I agree. Nick, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, it was, so we intended to follow the alternating 5 sets of 3, 5 sets of 2, but we got into the study and we had a couple of participants that misunderstood the protocol a bit. Poor instruction on my part, so we had to kind of modify the regimen. But they did either or, and some people alternated, and some people stuck with one. But I think the volume sets are important. I do. I think it was just it was a heavy load, and I got most of my volume sets. I think I might only fail 2 or 3 of those sets for the entire protocol. So just getting those solid reps in, it built confidence. It was a lot easier to me than the 1RM. So it was almost like a cool down, if you will.
Yeah.
It was a good way to finish the day.
I never had problem with volume sets. I always found the volume sets not that difficult. The only issue, so what I would also do a lot, I couldn't do this in the research, but in just when I'm doing it myself, I would often, if you set a PR, I remember I set a PR one day. I think it was the first time I hit 520, and I wanted to double 495 5 plates when working in pounds, and so I did. I took like 15 minutes and I just got more smelling salts and I doubled 495. And so like the 85 or 90% of that would have been less. It wouldn't have been like that much. And I would think I then backed off and did a few more sets after that. So I was able to do fun things like that anecdotally. But I agree, the volume sets weren't that difficult. And I felt confident in doing them usually. And to your point, Nick, the sessions would take a long time, especially if you're kind of with other people in training as well, which I did a lot of these sessions by myself. Although the first time I did it, I did do it with other people, and I would start training at night, which was atypical for me, but I was on the Florida State powerlifting team at the time. I would start about 6 o'clock, and those sessions wouldn't finish till after 9. And that brings me to kind of another point of, well, I want to talk about in a moment how to train the other lifts during this time, because I think it's really important. We're talking about, the one thing I'll always say about this is when I max squatted and my squat went up 40, 50, 60 pounds in these cycles, that was really good for my squat 1RM, but not necessarily for quite literally anything else I was attempting to accomplish in life at the time. But as long as my squat 1RM went up, my happiness went up. There was a pretty linear relationship in those days, so it was okay. But to the volume point, before we get to the other lifts, Eric, we've been talking about the data from the aforementioned Dr. Pack, and in the 3-2-1 study where he had, a couple times, 2 to 3 times a week, squat and bench press 1RMs or near 1RMs, and he had some back off volume. If I'm just looking at the numbers here, the individuals that did volume on average gained 6.5% on their squat. The individuals that just did the near maxes in Pack's study gained only about 3% on their squat. For the bench press, 6% on their bench press with maxing plus volume, and a shade under 2% only on their bench press. And for deadlift, there was a 6% difference, 7% increase with deadlift max and volume, and only a 1% increase with only the deadlift max. The one caveat I'll give to that is, let's say on the deadlift, we talked about this, they're only maxing once per week. If you're only maxing once per week, so 1 time per week max and that's it, versus another group 1 time per week max, then a couple sets of volume. Adding 1 set to the max is a 100% increase in the amount of volume you're doing. So I do think that in that case, it's not a direct comparison to what we're talking about here, because adding 1 set when you're only doing 1 set is a much more meaningful change than if you're maxing every day and adding a little bit of volume, or adding 5 sets of volume compared to adding 3 sets of volume. Nonetheless, Pack's data, Eric, suggests that the volume is important. There is data from Dankel et al. That suggests a bicep max every day on one arm versus a bicep max plus 3 sets of 10 didn't add to strength in the other arm. But that's not quite an apples to apples comparison. So
I gotta say it's not even a fruit to fruit comparison, because of the like that one I have a really tough time with, because the unilateral design is really helpful for hypertrophy, but it is directly confounded when we're talking about strength adaptation. So
the cross education effect.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So, but the volume does seem to be beneficial there. Eric, do you have a take on the volume? I suspect that you would believe the volume to some extent is important.
I don't think the volume is that different from the maxes. They feel very different. But what we're talking about is pretty heavy loads for pretty low reps in all cases. Doubles, triples, singles. Yeah, there obviously is a big difference between a single and a triple. But in terms of the kind of the loading ranges we're talking about, 85% of 1RM and up for the most part. To me, or I guess in packs was it 80%? I can't quite remember if it was.
I think so.
2x3 at 80% of the max. Yeah.
I believe it was 2x3 at 80%.
Yeah, that sounds right. So I think the way I like to look at PAX research is we have a comparison between 1 to 3 heavy sets and 3 to 9 heavy sets. And pretty clearly, the 3 to 9 heavy sets produce substantially more gains in 1RM compared to that, if we look at it on a weekly basis. Frequency absolutely probably does matter, but I think when you're dealing with that low of a threshold of total work, there's something going on there. And I think the interaction between squat and deadlift is also important. I think there's far more transfer between those two, and I think the bench is less fatiguing. So I think there are a few things going on here where I generally think the cost of doing daily 1RM training on bench is substantially different from a squat. And the difference between doing like daily 1RM training on bench while doing other stuff is also a lot different than trying to do it on squat or deadlift. So it doesn't surprise me when we see these types of findings, in my opinion. And I'm not sure that the volume work is something fundamentally different than the top sets. I think they're far more similar in the grand scheme of resistance training to one another than, say, the sets of 10 in Dankel were to the 1RM.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with you that, and I've done the protocol for both the squat and the bench press. That the squat was extraordinarily more difficult, especially I would get the biggest welts and open wounds on my back, and just continually putting the bar over. It would have no time to scab over because I had to go back to the gym, and your shirt is just bleeding, constantly, and that sort of thing. And you just have to keep doing it and keep lifting. And the people are constantly asking you if you're okay, but then by day 36, they're just like, it's just let Mike do his thing. It's whatever. Just leave him alone. We don't think it's good for his health, but he's fine. He seems to believe in it. And so I do think there's a greater cost there. But the one other aspect we've touched on here that I want to get to is, how should you train the other exercises? Because let's say, obviously this is a very highly specific thing, right? So certainly if somebody that's doing this, whether they're a powerlifter or they're a weightlifter, or they just have taken up an interest in, I really want to peak strength on this exercise in this short amount of time, right? That's the goal of this. And so they want to do that, but they're not going to neglect everything else, which I made the mistake of, right? And I didn't intend to, but those sessions went on for 3.5 hours. And I after that, I would sometimes have to go back to the biochemistry lab, and I would have to, sometimes an incubation was finishing, and then I would have to go back and do that or do some work. And so I just wouldn't have time to bench press, and my bench press drops like 60 pounds in this time because I just did 0 sets of bench pressing. So obviously that's not a good idea. But then I adopted a strategy where I got a bit smarter and said, okay, I'm going to utilize a 2 to 3 day a week, lower volume, but higher intensity, around 85 to 90%, where I could do minimal volume, because I did have some elbow pain from the squatting, and my bench press maintained pretty solidly there. So, Kaylee, did you train the other lifts during this time or any other exercises? Did you find that difficult? What did you do for them, and how did you find your strength on that? And then same question to you, Dr. Washmuth.
I kept hitting back and legs, but I do front squat, but also not very heavy. And so I didn't notice any big decreases in strength, but we did that once a week. So there was one day a week that we could hit everything else. So I think I noticed pull-ups got a little bit harder, but also I feel like I gained a lot of muscle in my upper body, well, just anterior delt really, and pecs, but so I don't know, and just like gained some weight during the study, so I don't know if actually pull-ups got harder because I was only doing it once a week or I gained weight. So, but I didn't notice any big differences really.
Yeah, part of my experience doing the protocol, I guess now 5 times, has been the more I did outside of the protocol, the more of overall fatigue I felt, obviously. So our goal for this project was to peak on, Kaylee was talking about it, we have a 1RM lab as part of our exercise physiology course. And it's a lab where PT students get to attempt a 1 rep max on a lift of their choice, and then do some back off sets to failure. And just for students to experience what it's like to actually do a true 1RM and actually reach failure on a less than 1RM load. And this lab, Scott Bickle runs this course, and it's evolved over the past 2 decades. And it turns out it's a bench press competition now, basically. So the primary goal is to peak on this day with a bench press. We didn't care what other lifts went down. We just cared about bench press on this day. So we had a very different kind of overall strategy than a strength athlete. So just respect that idea. So what I encouraged the students or the participants in this study was, feel free to lift on a different day, but just go keep it to 1 or 2 days outside of, 1 or 2 days a week out of other lifts, and keep it minimal, with the focus being the bench press to peak on that 1 RM day.
I don't see any way coming off of this podcast how the enrollment at Samford doesn't just go through the roof. Like if I'm 17 years old and I'm stumbling upon this, now there weren't podcasts in my day at 17 years old, but if I'm 17 years old watching this now, thinking of where I want to go to school, and I'm lifting weights and I'm hearing that there's this 1 RM lab and I have the opportunity to max every day. I have the opportunity to learn from Dr. Biceps himself and to have a lab focused solely on getting me the best possible bench press 1 RM that I can. And I mean this seriously. I don't think I would have considered any other university anywhere in the world at this time. So I hope that this is probably the best advertisement that Samford could have and that the physical therapy department could have. So I hope that there's somebody out there watching this that chooses their school based upon this. And if you were to choose Samford over where I am because of this, I would not fault you one bit. And I would go with that. So I think that is a great point, that you guys are doing this for this specific purpose. And so just on this topic in general, it really is important that, to talk about, would we recommend this, who we would recommend this for, under what circumstances and what situations. And I would really start at the most basic, which is, obviously, this is for the highly specific goal of 1 RM strength in that lift, in that exercise. So if you're a power lifter or a weightlifter and you're looking at experimenting with this, I would say it's possible it would be a good idea for you, but probably not till you have a certain training status, one where I think you'd really have technical mastery of the lifts. I wouldn't want somebody to go into this, if they're going to really open themselves up to injury just because they don't have the skill on the lift yet. Besides, if you don't have the skill on the lift yet, you're probably at an earlier stage, and it's just not necessary for you to do this to gain strength yet. So I would recommend taking advantage of the strength gains that you can from more typical training. Use kind of the values that we've talked about and how many sets per week and the recent meta regressions and so forth, and even lighter than that, lower than that, to kind of build up. But if you're at a point where this is something you want to try and you can sustain this, I would look at a few other things first, as well as what do you have going on in your life, and can you sustain this with any non-training external factors that might come into play. The reason I personally stopped doing this is because I started having other responsibilities and other things that I could have done. And for transparency, when I started, I would have done it twice a day. That's what I wanted to do, but I couldn't quite get there in what I had to do in life. And I did end up doing it twice a day for toward the end of a 100-day stint at one point. But what else do you have going on? Are you able to sleep enough? Are you able to eat enough? If you're going to be chronically underslept and you're not going to be able to eat enough, and you're going to be just getting slammed at work or slammed at school and constantly fatigued, it's probably not the time for you to try this protocol, right? I'd want you to go into this when you can really put your all into it. So I would suggest all of those other things in place, starting with a 30-day stint or so, perhaps even starting with a 2 or 3 day a week a la Dr. Pack study protocol, where you're getting the feel, working your way up to it. And then once you jump into this, you start doing it every day, and maybe you do it for about a month, or one of the protocols as in Nick and Kaylee's study or in our study, very similar to that. And you're performing a few sets of volume back off each day, saying I'm going to go over to about a 9.5 RPE on the max. And if you want to start in the bench press, it's probably an easier route to go rather than starting on the squat. If you do embark on it on something like the squat, again, know what you're getting into. And Dr. Washmuth talked about this as well, which is just mentally, you're going to be going through it some days. And it's not just that you're so fatigued and you can't get to the gym. It's that you get to the gym and you feel terrible, but you have to keep that mindset where you still might hit a PR that day, because let me tell you, you might. But you're going to be in that gym for hours. And you're going to have to make it through the warm-up and persevere and go through it. So I would just make sure everybody that is considering this knows what they're getting into when they do it. That being said, it is awesome. And if you have the ability to do it, I'm going to stop short of recommending you do it. But if you're so inclined, it's pretty sweet if you can do it and you can make it through, and you can do it for the long term. Start with 30 days. And again, I've done it 30, 50, 70, 100 plus days at a time. And it's been very, very cool. And I've never once done it where it hasn't been successful. So I would recommend going into it that way. But other thoughts, recommendations on people going into this in practice?
I do want to go. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Washmuth.
I wouldn't agree with what Mike said. Will add the idea that with our study, what I didn't expect to occur, in hindsight, it makes sense. We all shared a spreadsheet where we all entered our data, so everyone could see what everyone was doing. So there's camaraderie, encouragement, community involved there. A short story with what kind of that community. So I woke up one day and wasn't feeling it mentally or physically. So I just skipped the day. And in the column where I put reason, I just said, wasn't feeling it. So Tyler Williams and Scott Fickle come up to me and it's like, what happened? You weren't feeling it? So next time I go down to the lab, Tyler writes on his chalkboard, bench press or die trying. And just the comedy around that was good. So I think having somebody doing it with you is beneficial. That support, that encouragement, someone who actually knows what you're doing and doing it with you, I think would be advantageous to completing it and getting through it safely.
Kaylee, any thoughts?
I think you just have to commit beforehand. And I agree with everything Dr. Zourdos said too.
Yeah, the only things that I want to input here is from just generally training at very, very high intensities, that's, close to 1 RM for the purpose of increasing 1 RM, that I do think biomechanics plays a pretty big role here. There are certain people who just really seem to get disproportionately beat up by certain lifts. And if anyone has met Dr. Z, you can understand how he'd be all right doing 100 days of squats just based upon limb lengths and proportions. And if you met me and I was telling you, hey, I'm working up to a max of, 5 times a week on squats, 4 times a week on deadlifts. Oh, they're not full maxes. It's somewhere between 8 to 10 RPE. And I told you, oh, and by the way, like my back is in a constant state of being smoked. They would be like, that makes sense. I'm 6 foot. So, and I pull sumo just to try to get slightly better leverages in terms of how much load I have to put through my lumbar. There are definitely some people who are going to be disproportionately negatively affected by doing something like this. And just, it's not specifically about the 1RM protocol. It's about the lifts themselves. Something that I've definitely seen is that less can be more. I've trained several people who have pretty atypical limb relationships, I would say, or torso to limb relationships. And the thing that actually seemed to unlock their squat in one case, this is someone who, I'll give you the relative squat and deadlift numbers, and it'll help you understand maybe how they're built. But best squat ever was around 90 kilos. Best deadlift ever was around 140 kilos. And this is a short torso, long femur, female lifter. And hit that 90 kilo squat, going down to only training the squat once every 2 to 3 weeks, but doing a tremendous amount of accessory work and doing other things that enable her to stay more upright while still benching and deadlifting quite heavy quite frequently. And there was just a very clear disassociation between what would work for bench and deadlift and what would work for the squat. Also seeing the same thing that some people just simply, especially if they're an ultra wide grip arched bencher, just simply getting into that position under load starts to create issues. I noticed for me that because I bench max legal width, if I do a certain load and frequency of benching and squatting at the same time, I get to a certain point where I must do bench press first, or I have such severe pain through my arms from being in that pretty aggressive low bar position on squats that I'm losing intra-workout 10 kilos on my bench. So I have to bench first once I start to get that pain, or it's just there's no other way around it. So I find that the musculoskeletal limitations are probably going to crop up first for most people. Now, the one thing you can take from that is that means you're probably not built to be a power lifter, so maybe do a different sport anyway. But yeah, for all the meat nuggets out there, this is great stuff, you know?
What is that supposed to be?
But I have found that the best vehicles, you were a meat nugget, and you had a really good squat. Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Now you are a,
What did you think when you saw my physical appearance just a couple of days ago for the first time in 8 years? Were you alarmed? Were you going to ask me if I was okay?
No, I'd say you were well adapted to endurance training.
I think I just look like I'm 2 weeks out all the time, to be honest.
I mean, to be 2 weeks out implies from a bodybuilding competition, which it implies more muscle mass that you had. But I would say maybe in terms of the raw conditioning, for sure.
Things are being said. You know, on that, I agree. I think it's a great point that we needed to get in here. And so, and you alluded to this, saying it's not just about the 1RM training. Even more than that, I would say for some individuals, squat volume, meaning actually performing volume sets of squats specifically, is completely useless. In that their leverages are so poor for the squat. Yes, they must practice that skill to some extent, so they are ready for game day and they can do that and are familiar with that movement. But continually having them do lots of squats, if they have just poor ankle mobility and really long femurs and their torso is just not proportioned for this movement, that doesn't mean I don't think volume is necessary for them, but I think specific volume is probably a net negative for them in those cases. And so I would strongly recommend against that. And this outside of the 1RM discussion, just in their typical squat training and so forth. But being a, quote, meat nugget did have its advantages back in the day at that point. So
absolutely.
This area?
To be clear, my best squat is 227 at 93. Your best squat is like 230 at 74. So
that's correct.
You know, like it's good to be better built for powerlifting. So yeah, absolutely. And I think like when you look at the lifters who sustain and tolerate very high volumes and high intensities of high specific training at a high frequency, you tend to see much more homogeneity in terms of their build. I'll just say that. Totally anecdotal, but it's something I've definitely noticed in over 20 years kind of being in the game. So
that's right. You know, Eric, I have a question that I would like to ask Dr. Biceps here that I've been kind of chomping at the bit to get to, which is outside of this daily 1RM training study that you guys did, you have some research that's been coming out recently on the concept of swearing before performance and its impact on performance. And, you know, I reviewed a systematic review in Mass a little while back, Eric, that looked at various warm-up strategies and what they called, quote, psych-up strategies. And so when I saw some of these papers, Nick, that you had come out, I thought it was very interesting. And I would love to hear a little bit about the kinds of words, and if you could be very explicit, that the listeners of the podcast need to say to improve their strength and size. If you have any kids around, just say earmuffs, and then you can say whatever you want. If you could take us through some of that research, Nick, I did find it quite intriguing. I'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. This is my passion. So let me share kind of how this idea evolved. So Richard Stevens is a psychology researcher in the UK. And this was probably 2006 or so. His wife was giving birth, painful long birth, and she was swearing. And she and him were embarrassed, and the medical staff at the hospital were like, don't worry, it happens all the time. We hear more swearing than you would imagine during childbirth. And his research mind was like, there's something about swearing and pain. So he studied the effects of swearing on acute pain. So basically, he would have participants stick their hand in ice water, which was painful but not harmful, and while they repeated a swear word or a neutral word. And he found that participants could hold their hand in ice water longer while swearing. He also monitored some physiological responses too. So he found increased heart rate and skin conductance when the participants were swearing with their hand in the ice water. So his, again, psychology mind was like, okay, if there's let's say a fight or flight response, swearing may actually improve physical performance as well. So we tested that in the lab as well. So swearing improved grip strength and the performance in the wind gate cycling test. But the swearing group did not show increased physiological arousal compared to the neutral word condition. So he created this theory that swearing increases your state disinhibition. Essentially, swearing makes you less likely to hold back. So improves self-confidence, improves psychological flow, makes you more engaged in a task you're about to engage in. And he has repeated those studies again and again with other physical tasks. Some research coming out of Florida, Leah G9, looking at grip, looking at planks, push-ups, wall sits, a 90-90 L-sit position. Swearing improves your performance in all these physical tasks. We still don't know the mechanism by which swearing improves performance because the mediation analysis has not proven that disinhibition is, in fact, the mechanism by which swearing improves performance. But there is a reliable effect, at least in a lab setting. In a naturalistic environment, we don't know yet. But every study asks the participant to self-select their swear word. We all have different relationships with swearing. My favorite swear word may not be yours. So we asked the participants, what swear word would you use if you hit your head or stubbed your toe? And the protocol is repeat that swear word every second, out loud, with normal speech volume, every second for about 10 seconds before a lift. And you should see improved physical performance. The theory is it increases your state disinhibition. You're less likely to hold back.
What would your swear word be, Eric?
For me, I would probably be motherfucker. That's definitely, I would go full send.
Take it easy.
This is an academic discussion, Mike. We need to discuss the methods specifically. I listened to the protocol from Dr. Washmuth. He said I got to choose one. I didn't yell. I kept it in a normal volume. I think I need to say it again in another minute, though. Is that
10 times?
10 times. This might be more useful for people who train at home. I just put that out there. Being in a commercial, I mean, everyone wears headphones these days, so I think you can pretty much get away with almost anything in modern gyms. But if you're going to say certain commercial gyms of an older demographic, or especially if it's like a YMCA, I think this protocol might be a challenge in public. That's my first thought, actually.
Yeah, so I may have misspoke there. Say it every second for 10 seconds prior to the lift. And we have a study coming out now where if you use inner monologue, so swearing in your head. So be on the lookout for that publication. But inner monologue appears to be effective as well.
Wow.
So when you are at Planet Fitness or in a competition that is frowned upon to use the word motherfucker, then you can repeat that word in your head, and it may still offer some benefit.
Wow, there's a great scene in a classic movie called Demolition Man, where the main character, he is a police officer from the past who is unfrozen and brought into the future, and the future is a unique society, I'll say, where you are issued automatic fines if you swear. And they come from these little wall-mounted printed dispensers for fines if it catches you saying a swear word. It's also unique in that there are these magic 2 shells that you use when you go to the toilet that you're supposed to use to clean yourself after doing a number 2. And the lead character, of course, played by Sylvester Stallone,
John Spartan, by the way. His name is John Spartan.
Classic name, of course. John Spartan can't figure out how to use the 2 shells and has very little respect for this nanny state. So he simply goes up to one of these swear things and at a similar pace, once per second, just says like about 10 swear words. And then he takes his pieces of paper and he goes to the toilet. That's like what he does on a daily basis. And I can't help but wonder the similarity in protocols. Was Demolition Man part of an inspiring, or informative documentary that was helpful, Dr. Washmuth? Was that involved in this protocol at all?
It was not, unfortunately, but that's that I like linking media and to science here. So the theory is that swearing increases your state disinhibition. So in theory, you should see the effect in other realms as well. So we're beginning to study swearing's effect on, let's say, public speaking, where a disinhibited state may be advantageous to conquering some public speaking anxiety, or let's say approaching someone for a potential romantic relationship. The shyness that could be effective. Manual dexterity. So we're kind of studying it in different realms to help support this theory.
That is really interesting. And I could again see the importance of having inner dialogue working just as effective in these situations, because if I'm awkwardly walking up to a woman looking awkward and she's like, oh my God, what is this guy doing? Am I safe? And I was to just walk up to her and start swearing before then asking her out, I suspect that probably wouldn't help my chances. I could also see I'm graduating. I'm the valedictorian. I'm very intelligent, but perhaps I'm not quite socially competent, and we have a hot mic situation. That might not be a good lead-in to, for 10 seconds, say swear words before then, giving an address to everyone's family as well as the graduates. So I think that inner monologue work will be important. The final question I have, though, is, do you think that the ability to have it verbalized and maybe even a higher volume is worth exploring? Because personally, it feels cathartic when I feel pain. This is a response, not a preload, so this is probably totally different. But if I stub my toe, I don't want to quietly say the swear word. I want to yell it out. And I feel like it makes me feel better after the fact. I feel like it reduces the pain and it's cathartic. I don't know. What's your hypothesis there, Dr. Washmuth?
That's a great question. We just finished an IRB for that exact study. So looking at swearing while shouting, swearing while using a normal voice, neutral word shouting, neutral word normal voice, and seeing the impact. There appears to be a dose response with swearing. So when you say a less intense swear word, let's say ass or damn, you get a small effect in performance as compared to a more aggressive swear word like shit or fuck. So there may be some sort of synergistic or additive effect with swearing and shouting, but we don't know that yet. So we're exploring those questions.
We're laughing a bit, but obviously this is a really cool area of research. And I mean that because I tend to like things that are very practical. And I've talked about this in Mass Bit, and I know Trex has mentioned his enjoyment of kind of practical strategies as well. There's so many things out there, whether it's a supplement, whether it's this or that just is marginally effective, or it's cost prohibitive, or whatever it might be. And especially with the monologue research the internal monologue research has me interested as well. If something like this, certainly, okay, if you're in a public gym and you can't be yelling out swear words, okay. But otherwise, if there is a measurable effect on performance, it's something that you can do to improve performance. And if you think of any strategy in the warm-up or any psych-up strategy, or think of self-talk or visualization, these types of things, those are strategies that we talk about using. This, while maybe through a slightly different mechanism, Dr. Washmuth can speak to that. It's certainly better than I can. I don't know. But maybe through a slightly different mechanism, could accomplish something similar in a very practical manner in the 10 seconds before you approach the barbell, or if it's endurance exercise or whatever it is that you're doing. So if this tends to hold true, and then we have the other studies that you're looking at that compare the dose-response relationship, or the volume, or maybe the frequency or the timing or whatever it might be, that is a practical strategy to be able to improve performance. And in a world where I have conducted research myself and published various papers on warm-up strategies and written about it in mass as well, and in a world where I find the warm-up data to be extraordinarily underwhelming, I would, we all like talk about things like dynamic stretching. Well, that is not a consistent finding in the literature. I would do it, but it's not a consistent finding. So anything that I think you can add in there to be practical is intriguing. And if it's your natural response anyways, when something happens, to be like, oh, God damn it, right? That's my go-to, right? A little like smooth like that. Well, I'm just not as angry of a guy as you, Eric.
That's absolutely not true. Yeah.
Just think about the potential utility here. If you think back, I think it was the 2024 Olympics, the gold medal round for the 100-meter dash, 100-meter sprint. I think the difference between first and eighth place was like what, 0.5% or something.
Yeah, you famously didn't know the winner for 30 seconds. I remember Noah Lyles and whoever else standing there watching.
Right.
And you didn't think he won. It didn't look like he won in the live. But then, of course, how they crossed the line and the lean over. But yeah, it was extraordinarily tight between all of those individuals.
And as a professional elite Olympic athlete, any tool they could use to help enhance performance, I'm guessing would be beneficial, and they would just like to have these tools to utilize.
What if they turn on the starting blocks to their opponent and they say it to their face? Would that have a greater effect for them, or potentially a harmful effect because it would just entice that person and motivate them even more?
All great questions, and this is opening up more questions than answers. We're looking at the impact of verbal encouragement as well. So if you insert an expletive into verbal encouragement, is there an additive effect there?
From verbal encouragement, so from another individual, you mean, right? So we do have a substantive amount of literature on external feedback, whether it's verbal encouragement, whether it's velocity feedback, verbal or visual, whatever it might be. And we do tend to see that pretty reliably improve performance as well. So an expletive from another individual with verbal encouragement, it's another layer to it, and perhaps another boost. So I'm seeing there potentially a control, a verbal encouragement, and then a verbal encouragement plus expletive kind of design.
I've got to give a shout out to the now departed but longtime co-host of Iron Culture, Omar Isuf. He actually used this in a non-scientific setting to encourage healthy eating on his YouTube channel for the longest time. He would end all of his videos with "Eat your vegetables, eat your vegetables, eat your fucking vegetables." And I do wonder if some of the barriers to vegetable consumption in modern population is due to this potential inhibition effect, and if maybe it can even make vegetables more palatable. I think we could probably do some observational work to see if, say, people subscribed to Omar Isuf's channel during its most active period, and when he started implementing that outro, if there was an uptake potentially in vegetables. And I could see maybe even there being a collaboration between the American Dietetics Association as well as Dr. Washmuth and maybe even Iron Culture. So
the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in 2025, and also didn't the great Omar, perhaps host emeritus? I don't know. Also didn't Omar have a background in Bulgarian style training as well?
He did. He has done some daily 1RM work. So
I believe he has.
He's here in spirit.
Always.
What he did unknowingly likely was there's a data suggesting that information that is accompanied by a swear word is remembered more easily than information that is not accompanied by a swear word.
Wow. So Mike Israel's doing a great job out there, is what you've just told me.
And that makes sense when you think about things that are, when arousal is high, things are more immediately committed to long-term memory, right? You see a car crash, you see an accident. We know this from learning and memory research, right? You're going to take that in right away. Even being in a classroom, and the example that was always given to me when I was, taking neurophysiology courses, you see a professor's tie and it has like kind of a crazy pattern on it. you're going to kind of remember that. So it would make a lot of sense that a swear word would have the same effect. You would see that and commit that to long-term memory right away. Eric,
Man,
how are you feeling about what we covered today?
I'm pretty well. I think the listeners know exactly what to do, and that is max out on every single lift. And I would say, even though it's just an IRB form, I'd say anecdotally, if you want to hedge your bets towards getting the most out of this, potentially for the 10 seconds. Actually, you know what? I want to go with our misinterpretation of what Dr. Washmuth said, just to make sure we saturate that dose response. For 10 minutes between sets and leading up to each one of your maxes that you do on every single exercise every single day, actually 2 times a day, which you did, Dr. Z, and observational research, again, saturate the dose. Scream at the loudest volume you possibly can every minute on the minute, potentially every second on the second as well for the last 10 seconds to kind of have that escalating dose. The most vulgar swear word you could think of, I know the research has used self-selected, but given that there seems to be a dose response of I would say the social unacceptability of the swear word, that's probably going to get the best performance. And then if anything socially consequential happens from that, Dr. Washmuth, can we just put your email in the show notes? Probably your personal one.
100%. Cell phone as well.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. So that's who you want to address your questions to, potential any lawsuits or any of the above. But I feel like everyone has clear takeaways, practical takeaways from this, and that is just swear constantly at the highest volume you can before maxing out on every single lift you have twice a day. Dr. Zourdos, do you feel like I accurately covered the research of our guests?
I do feel like you accurately covered it. I just want to throw another plug in there because it is an underrated movie. If you do get a chance to watch Demolition Man, Sylvester Stallone, Wesley Snipes,
yes.
There's a lot of Taco Bell in that movie. Taco Bell survived the franchise wars, and you're going to enjoy it. Flashback to, I believe, 1993. But I think we covered some good ground here today, and I do want to thank very much Kaylee and Dr. Biceps for coming on the show today, because this is a topic that I have enjoyed for many, many, many years. And I truly have. I loved training this way. I was very proud of the work that we did on it. And I mean it sincerely. When I saw this paper come out in the literature, I just was so excited. I couldn't wait. I sent it to the mass crew. I sent it to my students, and I emailed you, Dr. Washmuth, right away. I also want to say, a fantastic job of making the data available, open access for everybody to see. It's such a pleasure these days to see more and more folks doing this, and the transparency and the data reporting here was excellent. I was able to go in and see everything in the data file. I loved the link and the software you guys used to report it as well. I might have some follow-ups on that because I don't typically use that. I'll use OSF and I'll put everything on there, but I thought this was really well done. So I want to thank you guys for that. Thank you for coming on and talking about this and indulging something that I thought was important, and now I've learned at least 2 other people think is important, and just really appreciate the conversation around the topic. And so that's all I have, Eric. I don't know if our guests have anything else before we sign off here. If they'd like to plug anything else about their work or anything else they're doing, I'm sure we'd love to hear about.
No, I very much appreciate the opportunity to be on this podcast, and I genuinely want to further this research about 1RM training. So let's somehow make this happen.
I am in. We will very, very much touch base off the podcast here. We'll probably leave Eric out of it because he seems to be a skeptic, and he made suggestions like you should maybe not max every day or get a little rest or take it a little easy. And to be honest, that's just not the kind of atmosphere that I want surrounding the work that we do. I also don't want anybody questioning our biases. Mm-hmm. I want to go into this, with what we already know is true. And so for somebody to come in here and suggest an alternative is just a little offensive, Eric. So hopefully Kaylee is on the same page as us. So Kaylee, do you have anything else to add to that? Or is there anything else that any other work you have going on that we should be on the lookout for?
Not yet. We do a capstone project at Sanford. So me and the girls that also did the study have already talked about furthering or further looking at the 1RM study in some way. So
what a capstone project. What a time to be alive, Eric. I am excited to see what these folks do in the future. And if they are willing to collaborate with myself, I would absolutely be honored to do so.
We're in the era of multi-site data collection, bigger data, and that's the way we're going to be able to answer the most important questions, like does yelling at the top of your lungs swear words before you max out on all lifts improve performance? So no, I want to, in all seriousness, just thank you guys for the work that you're doing and the contributions to the field. It is very interesting research, and of course, when we saw it come out, Mike truly did say in our Slack channel, I feel like I must review this. And I said, well, if you don't, I'm going to. So let's go. So I just want to thank you both for being on. I also want to thank the listener for hopefully learning something about how to train on a daily basis or twice daily basis. And as always, if you can support the show, give us a 5-star rating, give us a thumbs up, share it around. And if you want to really support us, definitely check out massresearchreview.com. And with that, I will say thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week on Iron Culture.